I have more money than I've ever had in my life. So why does spending $40 on dinner feel like a mistake? David said that to me last month. He's 61. 3 years into the retirement he spent his whole life building. He did everything right. Maxed the 401k, paid off the house, never carried a balance, not once. He's got $640,000 in his accounts, a home nobody can take from him, and a Social Security check that quietly covers most of his bills on its own. And he is terrified to touch any of it. Here's the part that should make you a little angry. There is a number, a specific, calculable number, where every extra dollar you pile up stops buying you security and starts costing you something you can't buy back. The Employee Benefit Research Institute studied real retirees and found that a third of them still had 100% or more of their savings untouched in their mid-80s. Read that again. Decades of "I'll relax once I have a little more," and the money never got spent at all. You think the danger is running out. For most people watching this, the danger is the exact opposite. It's reaching the end with the money still sitting there, and the years you could have spent it already gone. The question was never whether you saved enough. You probably did. The real question is whether your own brain will ever give you permission to enjoy it. Because here's what nobody tells the good savers. Picture a reservoir. Your whole career, you filled it. One paycheck, one match, one automatic transfer at a time. And somewhere on the wall of that reservoir, there's a line painted on the concrete, a water line. It marks the exact level you need to last as long as you statistically will. Hit that line, and the dam holds. You're done filling. You open the gates and live on what flows out. But filling that reservoir was your whole identity for 40 years. So when the water finally reaches the line, most people don't stop. They keep pouring. The water climbs past the line and spills over the top of the dam. And where does all that overflow go? Hold on to that question, because the answer is going to surprise you. And it's the entire reason this matters. So if you're anywhere near retirement, stay with me. I'm going to show you exactly where your waterline sits, why your old calculator drew it way too high, the psychology that keeps your hand frozen on the valve, and the 4 moves that finally let a lifelong saver open the gates without the fear. Let's get into it. Here's the first thing nobody told you, and it quietly changes everything. Every retirement calculator you've ever touched assumes the same thing, that you'll spend the same amount, adjusted for inflation, every single year for 30 years. Flat. Constant. The number you punch in at 62 is the number the spreadsheet still applies when you're 88. A researcher named David Blanchett went and looked at what real retirees actually spend, year by year, household by household. And that flat line is a fantasy. Real spending follows a curve he called the smile. Your 60s. Call them the go-go years. You spend. You finally have the time. You travel. You fix up the house. You fly out to see the grandkids. You eat out like you never could when a job owned your calendar. Then somewhere in your early 70s, quietly the rhythm changes. Not because you ran out of money, because 4 trips a year becomes 2, then 1. These are the slow-go years. And by your 80s, the no-go years. You're home more, and the spending drops again, even as healthcare creeps up. Blanchett's numbers are blunt. A retiree who starts at $100,000 a year watches their real spending fall to about $74,000 by age 84. A 26% drop. Nobody forced it, no crash, no budget emergency. That is simply how human beings actually age and spend. So watch what that does to your waterline. Calculators that assume flat spending overshoot what you truly need by 20 to 30%. The man who's convinced he needs $1.5 million, he probably needs closer to $1.1 million, which means a lot of you who think you're still almost there, you think you're behind. The data says many retirees are oversaving by 10 to 20%. You've been solving the wrong problem, beautifully, rigorously for years. And those extra years you grind out just to feel safe, you're spending your go-go years, the only ones you can never get back, buying a cushion you are never going to sit on. But isn't more always safer? Hold that thought, because the reason you can't bring yourself to spend is buried inside a rule you've trusted your entire adult life. And that rule was built for a disaster that almost never arrives. You've heard of the 4% rule. Pull out 4% of your savings the first year, Adjust it for inflation after that, and you won't run out for 30 years. It's the closest thing retirement has to gospel. Here's what they leave out. Back in 1994, the year Pulp Fiction hit theaters, a financial planner named William Bengen built that rule by asking one narrow question. What's the most you could withdraw and still survive the single worst run of markets in American history? The worst ever recorded. The 4% rule isn't a normal conditions number. It's a built-for-the-apocalypse number. But isn't it smart to plan for the worst? I thought so too. Here's the catch. You don't get to live in the worst run in history. You live in an average one. And in an average one, following the 4% rule to the letter, leaves you doing something quietly tragic, dying with a giant pile of unspent money on the table. The safety came at a price, and the price was paid in the things you never let yourself do. It gets sharper. The man who invented the rule, Bengen himself, looked at a whole generation of retirees too frightened to spend, and in his 2025 book, he raised his own number to 4.7%. The author of the 4% rule is now telling you 4% was too low. So let's put it on David. On his $640,000, even a cautious 4% is about $25,600 a year, every year, that the math says he's allowed to spend and very likely never run out of. That's on top of his Social Security, on top of a paid-off house, and he's pulling almost none of it. Every year he hesitates. The only person who reliably benefits is whoever charges a percentage to keep managing the pile he refuses to touch. So the math says spend. The man who wrote the rule says spend more. Then why can't David lift his hand off the valve? That isn't a math problem. It's something older, wired and far deeper. And it is the real subject of this video. This is the part that explains everything. Stay with me, because once you see this mechanism, you'll see it in yourself. For 40 years, David trained exactly one instinct. Watch the number climb. Spend less than you make. Never touch the principal. A falling balance meant danger. A bad month, a layoff, a mistake to fix. His brain learned to read a withdrawal as an emergency siren, and that instinct made him wealthy. It became who he is. Then he retired, and overnight, the game flipped on its head. Now the job isn't to grow the number, it's to spend it down, on purpose, safely before the clock runs out. But his brain never got the memo. So every time he takes money out, money that is completely, provably within plan, a 40-year-old alarm goes off in his chest. Nothing is actually wrong. The alarm fires anyway, so he obeys it. He puts the card back in his wallet. He skips the trip. He keeps pouring water into a reservoir that is already spilling over the top. Morningstar's behavioral researchers have a name for this. Loss aversion. The sting of losing $1 hits about twice as hard as the joy of making one. Sharpened by something called the endowment effect, the money feels more painful to part with precisely because it's already yours, and now it's leaving your pocket instead of an employer's. And here's the cruel twist. The anxiety about running out peaks in exactly the people who save the most, because they're the ones paying close enough attention to be afraid. The folks who genuinely didn't save enough aren't watching videos like this one. The fear lands hardest almost every time on the people who least deserve to feel it. So how do you shut the alarm off? You don't argue with it. You out-engineer it. Blanchett ran another study, and the title says all of it. Guaranteed income, a license to spend. Retirees who turn part of their savings into a guaranteed monthly check, an income floor, spend nearly twice as much as people sitting on the identical amount in a portfolio. Same money, double the living. Why? Because when the withdrawal arrives looking like a paycheck, the brain stops screaming. The alarm only knows how to fire it selling. It stays dead quiet for getting paid. The problem was never your math. Your math is fine. The problem is your operating system. The save everything mind is a brilliant tool for building the reservoir. It is the wrong tool for using one. But maybe you're holding the line for a reason that feels noble. Maybe you're not hoarding for yourself at all. You're doing it for them, the kids. Which brings us right back to that overflow and where it actually ends up. Remember the water spilling over the top of the dam? I told you the answer would surprise you. Here it is. A lot of you are pouring past your water line on purpose because you want to leave something real behind for your children. That isn't greed, that's love. I'm not going to talk you out of the wanting. I'm going to show you what actually happens to it. The Williams Group studied thousands of wealthy families handing money down through the generations. 70% of that wealth is gone by the end of the second generation, 90% by the third. Not because your kids are reckless, because the habits and the judgment that built the money don't travel through a bank wire. The discipline stays locked in you. Only the dollars move. So the overflow you're sacrificing your 60s to protect doesn't quietly compound in your grandchildren's accounts. Most of it evaporates within 20 years of leaving your hands. You think the problem is leaving enough behind. The real problem is that leave it all behind is a plan with a 70% failure rate. And the cost of running it is the years you spent working and white-knuckling instead of living. There's a better version of generosity, and it's quietly powerful. It's called giving with a warm hand. Giving while you're still alive to watch it land. A down payment when your daughter is 34 and drowning, not an inheritance when she's 64 and already settled. The very same dollar means 10 times more at the moment it's actually needed. And you get to be there for it. That's not less love. That's love that arrives on time. Let me put real numbers on this, because it stops being abstract fast. David, 61, $640,000, paid off house. Social Security brings in around $2,300 a month. That alone covers most of his essentials. He spends about $38,000 a year, and he treats every dollar over that line like it might be his last. Run his water line. His Social Security floor already carries the basics. The roof, the food, the lights. The slice his portfolio actually has to cover is small, and against a $640,000 balance, even at a careful withdrawal rate, the math says David could comfortably spend thousands more every single year for the rest of a long life, and still very likely die with money left over. He is not standing at his waterline. He's standing waist deep in the overflow, holding a garden hose, anxiously adding more. Now meet Susan, same age, nearly the same nest egg. She did exactly one thing differently. She built herself a paycheck. She took a slice of her savings and turned it into a guaranteed monthly income. So a predictable number lands in her checking account on the first of every month, automatically, for life. She didn't decide to be brave. She took the decision off the table. Can I afford this? Became, it's already in the account. Susan spends almost twice what David spends. She is not being reckless. The data says she is just as safe as he is. She flew out to see the grandkids this spring. She and her husband finally took the trip they'd been talking about for 15 years. She is living inside her go-go years, on purpose, while she still has them. Same market, nearly the same money, two completely different retirements. The only real difference is that one of them gave herself permission in writing. And there's one more thing that timing punishes you for. Most people assume they can always just work a couple more years to feel safe. But a study of thousands of retirees found that 58% left work earlier than they planned. Almost always because of their health or a layoff they never saw coming. The 2 more years plan depends on 2 years that may simply not be yours to give. The window to open the gates on your terms is shorter than you think. Here's the thing that ties all of this together. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. David isn't broke. David isn't foolish. David is disciplined, and that is exactly the problem. The same iron discipline that filled the reservoir is the discipline that won't let him open the gates. The skill that built the wealth is the skill that's freezing it solid. You were a brilliant climber. Nobody ever handed you the map for the way down. You spent 30, 40 years becoming a master of one thing, not spending. And then, somewhere around 60, the world quietly asked you to become a master of the opposite and never told you the rules had changed. So here's the map. 4 moves. Move 1, find your real waterline. Take what you actually spend in a year. Cut it by 15 to 20% because Blanchett's data says that's what your spending genuinely does as you age. Divide that number by 4%, that's your number. Now compare it to what you already have. If you're within 10% of it, or past it, you are not in the keep saving conversation anymore. You're in the when do I open the gates conversation. Most of you are further past the line than you dare to believe. Move 2. Build the floor that silences the alarm. Cover your essentials with guaranteed income. Social Security, and if it fits, a slice of your savings turned into a lifetime paycheck. Once the basics are handled by a check that shows up like clockwork, everything above it becomes what it was always meant to be, yours to spend without the fear. Move 3. Protect the first 10 years, then let go. Keep 2 to 3 years of spending in plain cash, so a bad market early on can never force you to sell at the bottom. That buffer does more for your safety than another 100 grand on the pile ever could. Build it, and then stop using "but what if the market drops" as the reason you're not allowed to live. Move 4. Spend the go-go years first. They are a depreciating asset. The trip you defer to someday gets quietly handed to a version of you who's too tired to take it. The money compounds, the memories don't. Front load the life. So what happened to David? He looked at the real number, finally, and he saw the overflow for exactly what it was. He set up the paycheck. He carved out his cash buffer. He gave his daughter the down payment instead of a someday inheritance. And he stood in the driveway and watched her cry. And the last time we talked, he'd already booked the flight. He stopped filling a reservoir that was already full. He opened the gates. You did the hard part. You spent a lifetime filling it, drop by drop, while everyone around you spent theirs as fast as it came in. Don't let the very discipline that got you here become the one thing that keeps you from ever tasting the water. Check your water line. The water's already there.